Hi, I'm John Maxwell. When the top companies in the world are looking for trainers, speakers, and coaches, there's one name that stands above the rest, and that's Maxwell Leadership. Our certified team members have gotten proven results for companies all over the globe, and our reputation, I'm proud to say, is second to none. Some of our members have risen to the top of their profession, including the one you're going to meet today. I proudly introduce you to my friend Bob Fabian Zinka.
Welcome to the Leadership and Success Podcast with your host, Coach BZ, where we help you lead with purpose and succeed with impact. If you're ready to grow into the kind of leader others want to follow, this podcast is for you. If you're determined to elevate your success and leave a lasting legacy, this podcast is for you. As my mentor, Dr. John C. Maxwell reminds us, everything rises and falls on leadership. Our goal is simple: to inspire you, challenge you, and equip you with insights that can transform the trajectory of your leadership journey. Welcome aboard to another episode of the Leadership and Success Podcast with Coach B.
I've experienced what it's like to live in extreme survival mode, both in my personal life and on the battlefield as a captain in the Marines during the Iraq War. It's not only that I've seen terrible things, but I have done terrible things in war just so that my troops and I could survive. I and many others who have fought in war live with the moral injuries of war, and those inner battles are the biggest of all the battles we fight just to survive. At some point, though, we have to ask why and to what end. These are the questions I asked when I resigned my position with the State Department in Afghanistan in protest over the futility, the corruption, and the lack of accountability for the war. After leaving the State Department, I settled here in beautiful North Carolina, where we were all living in survival mode as a consequence of the policies of the political establishment that have concentrated wealth in the hands of the few at the expense of the many, where the big corporations make record profits while the people can't afford to live where they work. We are witnessing our loved ones in our communities suffer. It's all connected. The choices that our government makes through the political system that we have now continue to prioritize corporations, banks, institutions like weapons companies over the needs of the people. And that's reflected in our domestic policies as well. If we come together, we can ensure the people of North Carolina are represented and that the people power is not spoiled by the two-party system. Why would we expect those who are benefiting from the current political system, whether it be the politicians in power or the corporations and banks that they represent, to change anything when those corporations and banks are making record profits? Meanwhile, working families are struggling more and more every day, every week, every month. That needs to change. I'm Matthew Hoh, and I'm running for U.S. Senate because I want all of us not just to survive, but to thrive together.
All right, welcome for a very impactful episode of the Leadership and Success Podcast. I think this is probably going to be one of the most insightful conversation we are going to have on this podcast today. I am really honored and grateful and privileged to be speaking to the person I'm going to be introducing to you in just a moment. What a great honor it is. But as is our custom here, let's start with our moment of gratitude. This is where we take just a minute every time we meet to be grateful. Part of the reason being because about 22 service member and veteran commit suicide in our military every single day. And I think it's not possible to be grateful and suicidal at the same time. So if you would, maybe close your eyes, put yourself in your happy place, take a deep breath, and think about one thing you are grateful for in this very moment right now. And I think I am really grateful for our core values in this country, what we represent to the world. And people like Captain Matthew Hoh, I'm going to be speaking to, the moral courage they really represent. That's really the spirit of America, and I'm so grateful for it. All right, so if you would type into the comment, let us know where are you joining us from. It looks like Daniel Young is joining us from Maitland, Florida, and we have another member joining us from Southern Cal. And he's saying, thank you, Matt, for your service. Honored to serve alongside you in diplomatic corps and U.S. military. Wow. I'd like to know who that person is. Let me see if I can find out. Looks like that's Bill Kurz. Thank you. Thank you so much, Bill. And also, let us know what you are grateful for today. And of course, if you do have a question for the captain, please type it in the comment and we will be answering your question live. Okay. Let me see if I can properly introduce our guest today. This might be kind of a challenge. Now, myself as a former commanding officer in the U.S. Navy, I really view anybody who served in the service, even just for one day, any of the branches, as a hero. That's really the way I look at it. Less than 1% of us in this country raise our hand and volunteer to wear the uniform. But there are heroes, but then there are heroes, if you know what I mean. And today, I am really speaking to somebody I consider a true American hero. I'm talking about Captain Matt Hoh. He's a U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran, former State Department officer, and nationally recognized voice on war, foreign policies, and moral leadership. I first heard about him. I think I watched him. It was on MSNBC or MS now. He's a thought leader and he knows exactly what he's talking about because he's been in combat, right? He led Marines in Iraq as a company commander. The few, the proud, the Marines. He served in Afghanistan with the State Department, made a defining decision in 2009 to resign in protest of the war's escalation. Wow, what courage. He was awarded the Ridenhour Prize for truth telling. He continues to shape national dialogue on leadership, ethics, and the future of conflict. Matt represents a rare kind of leader, one who has seen war up close and still had the courage to question it. Part of what we're going to be talking about today, and I believe you are going to learn, is the difference between physical courage and moral courage. So, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, please help me welcome to the Leadership and Success Podcast, the one and only Captain Michael Hoh.
Hey, thanks,
All
Bob.
right.
Thanks for having me join you. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and it's really fantastic that Bill Kurz is on the line here. Bill,
Yes.
I appreciate you being here. Bill and I were in the State Department 20 years together. Back in
Wow.
2005, 2006, we were on the Iraq desk together. So it's really, really great to hear his name. So
That is really, really amazing. And one thing for sure, I mean, the military is kind of like a second family, really. I guess we call ourselves, right, brothers and sisters in arms. And I think that's one thing, we'll probably be retiring sometime this year. That's one thing I'm going to miss a lot, just the camaraderie, the no, the fraternity within the military. You really meet people you didn't know at first, and they may come from a completely different background or whatever. But you really become tight. I mean, they are willing to take a bullet for you. I can say the same, right? In the industry, Silicon Valley or Microsoft or Google, nobody's ever gonna do that. So it's really really powerful. Now, even you, this is really the first time we are meeting now, but I feel like I've known you forever. It's just amazing to be a member of this special fraternity. So, to get started, Matt, let me ask you, what is one thing you are grateful for today?
I just very personal. I just had we had our father's 90th birthday
Wow.
over the weekend.
Nice.
And as we talk, as we get into these topics, these questions, these thoughts on leadership, I'm probably going to reference my father a lot.
Wow.
And
That
so
is,
the gratitude I have for my family, but specifically in this moment to
yes.
be Andy Ho's son, I think that's if I close my eyes and what
Yes.
am I feeling, that's where I'm at.
That is powerful. Do you come from a military family?
No, we have people who were in the military. I had a couple uncles that were great uncles that were went ashore in Normandy. I had a cousin who was in the Marine Corps, got kicked out for selling drugs.
Mm.
I mean, so various, uncle in Europe during the 50s. My dad was in the National Guard in New York during the
Ah,
50s, right? I mean, so, but no, not a military family, as most people understand that term of generations being
yeah.
in uniform.
Well, that's more than I could say about my family. I'm the one and only one, and I know none of my daughters are going to join the military for sure. So I might be the one and only one in my entire line. But that is all right. Thank you for all who have served. Is there something about you, Matt, that most people may not know when they first meet you?
I think, to get into probably the topics you want to talk about, Bob, is that I've got the signature wounds of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've got the invisible wounds, the traumatic brain injury, the moral injury, and the post traumatic stress disorder, uh,
Yes.
and the extent to which those have limited me. I think, for many veterans, as well as people, in other fields and occupations and industries who deal with these types of wounds,
Yes.
of these disabilities, it's not apparent. So people see you, and they think you're okay. Nothing's
Mm.
wrong with this guy. I know I can give
Yes.
him, in my case, the work I do, media work. I'll do a podcast or I'll do a radio or
Mhm.
television appearance or what have you, and everyone thinks you look fine. And you don't see that I needed to take a barbiturate that day, right, in order to get out of bed because of the, incapacitating migraines I have from my TBI. I mean,
Mhm.
so just I think that is something that in the, spirit of what you're trying to do,
Yes.
the struggles that people go through and the unwillingness, and you reference this, the unwillingness to, particularly as veterans, to put yourself first, to
Mhm.
or do anything that would expose your weakness.
Yes.
And of course, the reality of that is when you don't do that, when you don't take care of yourself, and you're not honest about who you are and what you're going through,
Mhm.
eventually, the diminishment, right? And you're further weakened by that because you're not getting support, you're not taking care of
Yes.
right, of yourself, and others aren't able to help you, and so you actually end up being a much weaker place
Mm.
if you're not willing to address your issues, your trauma, your injury, your
Yes.
disabilities, than if you were. And so I think that what you do is such a valuable service, because I can tell
True.
you the reason why I got help for my issues following the wars was because
Yes.
there were people, other guys, men and women, other combat veterans, talking
Yes.
about what they were going through at home. And so
Mhm.
I saw that, I recognized that in myself, and that gave me the courage and the sense to go
Yes.
and start getting help.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I think it's a message we really need now. And to me, at least from my experience, it's mostly with male than female service members. Because I don't know about you, but I got in the Navy 21 years ago. Back then, if you saw a psychiatrist, you had some type of uh, mental health issues or whatever, they would actually kick you out because you would lose your security
Right.
clearance, and then the Navy would get rid of you. So that's no longer the case. Actually, now we are asking you, hey, if you're having trouble, please let somebody know because there is so much help. The VA, I mean, there's just so many resources out there. And like I started the show, like I said, part of the reason why we do this moment of gratitude every single time we meet is because about 22 people, service member, who commit suicide every day, not every week, not every month, but every single day. So it is really a big problem. And for most male I know in the service, if they get physical injury, very easy for them to raise the hand, go to the medic or whatever, and get help. But if it's no mental, then there's still somewhat taboo. It's not as taboo as it used to be 20 years ago, but
Right.
I think there's still this sense of shame, or I am not complete, I am broken, or something. But part of what I'm trying to do with this podcast is to let everybody know, hey, it's perfectly okay. You need help, go get help, and everything is going to get better. And you are not also the only one going through it. That's very, very important to know. I know when I came back from my last deployment is when I got diagnosed with PTSD. First, I couldn't believe it, but but now that I am getting help, it is getting a lot better. So
Right.
there is plenty of help out there, and I think it takes some type of courage to say yes, I need help, and please help me. Anything you want to add to that,
No,
Matt?
there's still a stigma. I don't believe it's as bad as it was, when I was in, say, late 90s. If somebody went to see a psychiatrist or a
Mhm.
psychologist, it was referred to as going to see the wizard,
Yes.
right? And so the ridicule, and so
No.
nobody was going to do that if they weren't forced to do it.
Mm.
And just as well too, the other ways the Marine Corps handled not just mental health issues, but also, say, substance abuse issues.
Yes.
I could tell you a story. I had a Marine. He was a welder, and he used to cut the bodies out of the Humvees that were hit by IEDs.
Mm.
He did that on Christmas Eve one day,
Wow.
cutting bodies out of Humvees. And this young man was 19 years old. He was a reservist. He was
Mm.
19 years old, 20 years old maybe. And when he came home, he was medicating himself with marijuana. And he popped positive, of course, on a drug test, and they kicked him out with a bad conduct discharge. Right?
Mm.
Nobody stopped to ask, was he smoking marijuana because he's 20 or 21? Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But was he also doing it because did he know that he would get kicked out of the Marine Corps for it? But he realized that this is the only way I can help myself is through
Mhm.
smoking pot, right? I mean,
Yes.
so there was also too that intolerance for understanding what our Marines or sailors or soldiers or airmen were
Yeah.
going through, the trauma, and it just was something that it was nonsensical. It was
Mhm.
totally ahistoric. I mean, because this type of trauma has always existed.
Yes.
Literature is full of this. Shakespeare writes about it. Homer writes about it.
Yes.
So it's ahistoric, and it also is ultimately self-defeating because we lose a lot of good men and women because we're not helping them heal. If they were to
Yes.
fall off the obstacle course and break their leg, we do everything we can to get them back on that obstacle course,
Sure.
right? I mean, but not in this case. Not you go to war, you
Mm.
come home, not the same. And people didn't want to hear about it. And then only when it
Yes.
became a real problem, the services were embarrassed about it. I felt that then the emphasis started to be put on it.
Yeah, and hopefully we are gonna bring more awareness about these issues because they are real and they do affect real people. And again, in my mind, American heroes, because it really takes courage for you to raise your hand and serve your country the way we do. So I will always have a very, very special place in my heart for anybody who's ever served in the U.S. military. So let me ask you this: before the uniform, before the war, who were you as a person?
Oh, I was, I think I was a pretty normal kid. I played sports. I ran track and cross country in high school. You're looking at a 6-time second place state champion.
Wow.
I was a history nerd. I wanted to study international relations. I wanted to be a part of all the stuff that you and I have taken part in.
Hmm.
I went to college and studied a lot of philosophy and literature and religion, and then went to work for uh, a publishing company doing finance for them. And I was bored out of my mind, Bob, bored out of my mind. And I had in high school had an Army ROTC scholarship and also happened accepted into West Point and declined those because there was a part of me that was really horrified by the Gulf War. So I was a senior in high school in 1990, 1991. And I was really taken by this idea of we're supposed to be in a new world order.
Hmm.
This is not supposed to be the way that we're creating the fruits of the end of the Cold War. I was a huge nerd, so I really did think these
Yes.
types of things, right? And but also too, I was horrified by the idea of blood for oil, and so I decided, military is probably not for me. And then after being out of college for a couple of years, I was bored. Like I said, I was working for a publishing company in Boston. I was doing finance for them.
Mm.
There was a route for me, right? I mean, do this for another couple of years, go and get an MBA. Like there's a clear path. but I
Yeah.
was bored out of my mind. I was bored out of my mind. And I wanted to be a firefighter. But at that point in the 90s, it's tough to get a job as a firefighter,
Mm.
residency requirements, and I was impatient. So one thing I know you want to talk about advice
Yes.
to younger people: have patience, right?
Yes.
It's the world's not going to end tomorrow, kind of thing. But I was impatient. So anyway, I saw an advertisement in the New York Times for Marine Corps officer candidate school. And
Mm.
yeah, I went, and it took about 9 or 10 months to get into OCS. And so
Wow.
I went in January of 1998 to OCS.
That's really amazing. So, what early experiences kind of shaped your sense of duty and service?
Well, I brought my dad before, and certainly that's a lot of it. My dad was a firefighter, and growing up as a kid in New Jersey, we lived a couple blocks away from the fire station. So
Mm.
the plectron, the scanner, the
Yes.
radio in the house would go off, and he would run down the street to the fire department. I mean, so like that type of, everyone's dad's their hero, but here's my dad like being a hero. And that was back in the 70s, and they fought a lot of working fires still in New Jersey back then. And
Yes.
I mean, so like it was that, um,
Hmm.
yeah, that I mean, not just to be a hero, I think, but also too was the idea of service. It was the
Yes.
idea of duty. It was the idea of running to a fire to help somebody. And I
Mm.
think I had that very much early in my life. And I wanted to be part of something bigger myself. Again, I was a
Yes.
huge nerd. I mean, like when I was a kid, Bob, the greatest thing that could happen was to get a hold of a copy of, say, like the New York Times or the Washington Post. That would have been so exotic for a kid in New Jersey, right?
Wow.
I mean, that kind of thing. So I was 15 years old. I was subscribing to The Economist. So I always wanted to be part of something bigger than myself, right?
That's
Be a part
amazing.
of the world and be a part of history and be, a small little cog in the
Mm.
big hand movement of time or whatever. Yeah. So I,
Nice.
I think that's how those two parts, wanting to challenge myself, be a part of something bigger than me, but also
Yes.
too, there is that, I've got to be honest about this. There was this, okay, I need to be a hero.
Mm.
And that's really crass the way I'm saying that. I think people
Hmm.
understand what I'm saying, but I want to
Yes.
be of service. I want to be part of something. I want to be part of a
Yes.
mission. I want to do something for others, kind of thing. Yeah.
That is really powerful because for most people there is a fire, they run away from the fire. But people like you and me, we actually want to run into the fire, try to save someone, either physically or like what I'm doing now in cyber security. But where do you think that that drives comes from? Where you are willing to put your own life on the line for the benefit of somebody else? Not too many people are willing to do that.
I think a lot of it comes from how we're raised. Certainly,
Okay.
we're infused with all types of culture, all types of entertainment,
Hmm.
history, stories, myths that
Yes.
teach us these things, right? But also, too, I think it's how we're raised, and
Mm.
even outside of the family, I have to also speak about my coaches in high school. I had great teachers in high school. I had two in particular, Mr. Schmidt and Mr. Parent, history and English, who taught me how to think critically. I owe them everything. And the same, my coaches, Coach Roberts and Coach O'Rourke, Coach Heidecker. These are men who taught me not just teamwork, but
Mm.
leadership. And I think that idea that you can't separate teamwork and leadership, that
Yes.
right? I mean, that they are one and the same thing
Mm.
in many ways. And so I think that's how I arrived at the place I was as an adult,
Yes.
because I was fortunate to go to a high school where you had a Mr. Schmidt and a Mr. Parent, a
Mm.
Coach Heidecker, a Coach Roberts, a Coach O'Rourke.
That's really powerful. But now, in addition to your sense of duty and service, there is also this sense of honor, integrity, and most importantly, in my view, courage, because that's what allows you to actually stand on your core values, even though it might hurt you professionally or personally. What early experiences kind of shaped your sense of honor and courage?
Again, I think it's a lot of what we consume. It's a lot of the histories, the stories, the media that we take in,
Yes.
the foundational documents that inform who we are,
Hmm.
what we learn sitting in church, what we learn from watching our sports teams, right? I mean, like it just coming from all different angles. This idea of then how do you act appropriately?
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this question of what does honor mean to me, and
Mm.
I think what I've settled on, Bob, is this idea that honor means when it's all said and done, you're able to open up all the doors in your mind. That you're
Wow.
not going to be walking around with a door closed in your head, right,
Hmm.
or in your soul that you won't open because you know what's there, right? So
Wow.
it really comes down to an issue, I think, of integrity. And so I think watching uh, who we have as our mentors, right? Who we have as our teachers, our coaches, but then
Yes.
also too, I recall I grew up a New York Mets fan, and
Mhm.
so the idea that uh, the players have faults and were fallible. The issue wasn't that Darryl Strawberry or Dwight Gooden were doing cocaine. It's the issue
Yes.
of what did they do afterwards, right?
Mm.
I mean, Dwight Gooden, who is just one of the best pitchers of all time, and
Yeah.
as a 21-year-old is at the height of any type of fame. Why would you not expect a 21-year-old being put in that situation
Hmm.
to not do the cocaine when it's offered to him, right? Particularly depending on where he came from. But the
Yes.
question then is, what does he do afterwards? How does he, right? And so I think that for me was a big thing as well, seeing how
Mm.
people handle themselves after their faults have been demonstrated. And oftentimes, if
Yes.
we're hearing about it, their faults have been broadcast to the world.
Wow. That is really, really powerful. So it's not really what happened to you, but how you respond to it. And
Right.
man, because there is one thing, for example, in the Navy, right, we have three core value. Every sailor knows that, no, honor, courage, and commitment. It's really drilled into us from boot camp and on. That's what we really live by every single day. Not that we are perfect, because we are human, we still make mistakes, but really, again, the humility to learn from your mistake, right,
Right.
and then do better. That's really quite powerful. Okay, for this next segment, let's talk about leadership under pressure, leadership in combat and crisis. You were fortunate to be a Marine Corps company commander in Iraq. What was one of the hardest leadership decision you had to make under pressure?
Oh gosh, I'll go to before we deployed. So I was a reserve officer, volunteered, took a command of a Marine Corps combat engineer company out of Lynchburg, Virginia,
Mhm.
and this was in this spring of 2006, and we were caught in between. My company was caught in between the active duty and the reserve forces. No one wanted to take ownership for us. We were bastard
Mm.
children. And I could just tell you just story after story. But to give you an idea of the battalion mindset that my unit came from, first of all, it was a composite company. So we pulled from every company within that battalion. So my company was made up of essentially 5 or 6 other companies of Marines who volunteered. But then we had our corpsmen came from active duty, so it was a mishmash that we had to put together. But we
Yes.
had once we detached from that battalion, they didn't want anything to do with us, and they didn't want anything to do with us before we even went. And just one
Mm.
story of many I can tell, is, and I'm sure there are people out there who had similar experiences. We're going to Iraq in 2006. We're going to Anbar province, and my battalion doesn't want my company to take our TO pistols. So for people not familiar with that, the pistols that are authorized, that the Marine Corps says, if you have this company, this is the
Mm.
amount of pistols you're supposed to have. My
Yes.
battalion didn't want us to take our pistols to Anbar province in 2006 because that would have left them short-handled for pistol qualification here in the United States.
What?
That was the type of what we were dealing with. We had problems getting ammunition. I was told a couple
Mm.
times that don't worry about it. Your Marines can shoot their weapons when they get to Iraq. We spent more
Wow.
than 2 months at 29 Palms before we spent months at 29 Palms, but we spent more than 2 months at 29 Palms in air conditioned case bands in the summer. Case bands are these giant metal Quonset huts, essentially.
Hmm.
Yeah, because again, there was First Marine Division didn't want us. Fourth Marine Division said we didn't belong to them anymore. And so that type
Wow.
of, all other things too. We were significantly undermanned. I had one second lieutenant. I was supposed to have been. I was going to Iraq to support a regimental combat team, and I had essentially one second lieutenant as the other officer in the company. The company I replaced
Wow.
had 6 or 7 officers at least. The company that replaced me had 6 or 7 officers. I mean, so it was just across the board.
Yeah.
That was the hardest thing. And what happened was, just in terms of, and certainly in Iraq, it was intense,
Mhm.
absolutely intense. But just for the sake of this conversation, and I know what you're trying to get out of here, is this idea that it was so bad that I basically had to offer myself up. And I don't think I've
Mm.
ever publicly told this story, but a friend of mine was the aide to the commanding general of the 4th Marine Division.
Yeah.
And he was coming out to 29 Palms before we see us, and nothing had gotten anywhere. And I spoke to my friend Dave, who was his aide, and he said, "Have you been documenting all this?" And I said, "Absolutely."
Mm.
And he said, "Okay, good." And when the general showed up, all my Marines, everywhere he went, my Marines just rattled off this list of issues we had. And finally, after
Wow.
visiting my second or third group of Marines who were out training and hearing the same things, we
Mm.
stopped everything. And yeah, I mean, I thought I was going to get relieved, but fortunately, I had everything documented. But that's what had to be done. It had to make a scene, had to cause a problem, had to, my battalion commander
Wow.
should have been relieved. He should have been fired.
Yes.
I mean, but had to like go to that extent in order to get the Marines the training they needed, in order to get them the ammunition they needed to qualify to go to Iraq, in order
Mm.
to get them out of air conditioned case bands in August in 29 Palms.
Yes.
So is that type of pressure where you're being let down by your command and you're being sent to war?
Mm.
We were 50 Marines short of what we needed to support that regiment. We were 5 or 6 officers short of what we needed, right? And
Wow.
so that type of pressure. And then, of course, you get to Iraq and you don't stop operating, you don't stop executing, you don't stop uh,
Yes.
being on the mission, until you're back home.
That is really, really powerful. Again, not many leaders would do that. You pretty much put your own career on the line for your people. What was going through your mind at that time?
Oh, I was just terribly angry, terribly angry. Also, too, I had already spent a year in Iraq, so I have my uh, biography, my background is not linear. It's I went in the Marine Corps in '98. I went to Okinawa first, and then I went to the Secretary of Navy's office, where I was a junior Marine officer on the Secretary of Navy's staff. And in the summer of 2003, I was told I would spend at least another 2 years, maybe 3 more years in the Pentagon, because the war had screwed up, manpower assignments, and stop move was occurring and everything else.
Mhm.
Everyone was being extended in their current place. And my thought was at that time too, 2003, was I had missed the war. I never really saw myself having a career in the Marine Corps.
Mhm.
5 some odd years in the Marine Corps. Okay, good enough time to get out. And as so I got off active duty when I was in the Pentagon. I went on board with the Department of the Army as a civilian Department of Army official. Went
Yeah.
to Iraq for a year as part of a State Department team with the embassy
Wow.
there. Came back, was at the State Department as a consultant on the Iraq desk with my friend Bill, and
Mm.
then mobilized from there to the Marine Corps. So I had already seen a
Yeah.
lot of the unpreparedness that units had gone through. I already seen this betrayal. Had been in a big issue, a big fight in the
Mm.
Pentagon due to the way that the Marine Corps casualty process had let down so many families of those who were
Yes.
killed in the first couple months of the war. I was involved in the midst of all that, trying to get something,
Yes.
my boss and I trying to get something fixed, and just running into that institutional obstruction, right? That running into that bureaucracy, as
Mhm.
well as running into the officers who said, I don't want to touch this because then
Mm.
my fingerprints are on it. And I
Wow.
don't want to be associated with something like this and just essentially passing it on, hoping
Mm.
it would just die. I mean, I'd already seen that with the families of Marines who have been killed in Iraq in March and April and May of '03.
Wow.
So as well as all the other things that if you're ever in the military, you understand a
Yeah.
lot of times the slogans that are on the posters, the stuff that's on the bumper sticker,
Mhm.
that's not how a lot of our brothers and sisters in uniform behave. So
Yeah.
I'd already seen that. So, but there was an anger because in the short time I had with these Marines, I was their company commander. I was
Mm.
responsible for them. I had met their wives. I had met their brothers and sisters. I had met their
Yes.
moms and dads. These were reservists. So you have a lot of young and all men, young
Mhm.
men who were college students, right?
Yes.
Still living at home. So the people that go and see them off are their
Mhm.
mothers and fathers, and that's a burden that you have there. So
Yes.
it was that anger, this idea that no one is going to do this to these kids, to my Marines,
Mm.
right? And I'll burn this place down if these Marines don't get what they need, and that's essentially what we had to threaten to do.
Wow. Let me take a moment to think about that because that is so powerful. So, what did you learn from that experience, Captain?
One, document everything. As soon as I mean, this is
Yes.
much more practical, right? But as soon as you run into an issue, and this is something that I've been told years before by
Yeah.
a mentor of mine, a retired Marine, who he'd always say something along the lines
Yes.
always prepare like you're going to your court martial, right?
Yes.
So take it that seriously. But I also learned too that you have to be proactive. You have to be forceful. You have to be willing to stick your neck out for
Mhm.
those that you are leading. Leadership is
Mm.
is essentially like you're on a stairwell, right? And you have to go up, but you also have to go down. And so
Yes.
you have a responsibility, of course, to your superiors, but you have a greater responsibility, I've always believed, to your
Yes.
subordinates.
Yes.
And so, taking care of your Marines and particularly knowing what they were going to. I've already spent a
Mm.
year in Iraq. I knew what we were getting into, knew where we're going in on-bar, what we would be doing. We'd be doing route clearance. We'd be doing cache sweeps. We'd be essentially supporting the infantry the entire time in the second most violent province in Iraq.
Mm.
And, you would think it's impossible that the Marine Corps, 3 years into that war, over 4 years into the war in Afghanistan, would not have it together to cycle reserve
Mm.
units through without. No, they certainly did not have it together. And there were a lot of officers who were just looking at the calendar, waiting for us to
Wow.
leave, because then we certainly would not be an issue any longer. So it's that
Mhm.
lack of trust in the institution and also as well the unit. And then the other thing is that they don't change. They don't change. On the back end of it, we're coming home. Um, the We medevaced a lot of Marines back to the States from Iraq. And my
Mm.
first sergeant said, "Hey, sir, it'd be great if maybe those Marines could come up from Camp Pendleton Hospital and meet us when we get back to 29 Palms." And oh my
Mm.
God, that's fantastic. Why didn't I think of that for kind of thing? Like
Yeah.
it's my first. I was blessed with the first sergeant I had too. So so First Sergeant Miller calls back to our battalion and says, "Hey, this
Well,
is what we
and
like to do."
also, sorry for people who don't know the military, first sergeant, that's the equivalent of chiefs in the Navy. So these are senior enlisted,
Right,
non-commissioned
right,
officer.
right.
And in my opinion, they truly are in the military.
Right, absolutely. He was responsible for running our company. That was it. Yeah, exactly. That's the best way to put it. But anyway, so he calls back to the battalion, and the battalion says, "No, you can't do it. It's impossible to
Mm.
do. No, you can't do something like that. You can't get orders for that. You can't get funding for that." And so far, Sergeant Miller hangs up the phone, starts making some other phone calls, and within a couple of phone calls, he's connected to the Semper Fi Fund. And the Semper Fi Fund says, "Oh yeah, we do stuff like that all the time. No problem. Guess the names. We'll reach out, get the orders for you, and the funding."
Wow.
I mean, so like the same unit that
Yes.
didn't want to give us our pistols because they were afraid they wouldn't have enough for pistol
Mm.
qualification, even as we were going to Haditha and hit and
Mm.
Rawa and Al Qaim and everything else. Um, you know, the, Almost a year later, they were
Wow.
still the same way. No, it's impossible. You can't have your wounded Marines who were medevaced meet up with your unit when it returns. You just can't do it. You know, I mean, that was the type
Wow.
of mentality. So that's something else too. I think is really important is that there are men and women, and there are units that will never change, and you have to understand that, and you have to figure out how to work around it. And I remember that's one of my favorite stories about First Sergeant Miller, because he hung up the phone with the Sergeant Major, and he just started dialing other numbers, right?
Yes.
And eventually we got it, and it was fantastic. The Marines were there, and it was a fantastic experience. I'm really glad we were able to do that.
That is really, really powerful. Where there is a will, there is a way. I feel like, in my experience, most government employee and the military, we are government employees too. It's almost impossible to get fired, at least up until last year, I should say, because once you get a government job, you're pretty much there forever. You have to kill somebody or something in order for you to be removed from your position. So people, they know they can do the bare minimum, and they still get the job, the benefit, and everything else. So the less they do, kind of, the better it is for them. And I've seen that quite a lot. And that's very different from somebody who actually wants to do something, take care of the people, take no excuses, and really care for their sailors,
Right.
or their Marines.
And for a lot of us, Bob, who are in the military, as officers, you might only be in that billet for 18 months.
Yeah.
So it's only a matter of time till it's not your problem anymore, right? And so it's very easy to say, you know what, I tried, and I've only got 6 months left here, 10 months left, whatever it is, and then I'm on to my next assignment. So let's not make waves. Let's not let people think I'm some type of malcontent, right? That I have issues, or I'm overly negative. It's very easy to fall into that sense of complacency of, oh yeah, my billet's only 18 months. I'm only on station here for 36 months, and then I'm moving on. So why, I tried, I did my part. It's really easy to do that.
Yeah. But now, talking about the war in Iraq, you mentioned betrayal. Now, one of your friends wrote this book, right? Deadly Betrayal, Dennis Fitz.
Yeah.
Can you tell us why my audience should read this book?
Well, Dennis Fritz retired as a E9 in the United States Air Force. He was a senior enlisted advisor to a couple of 4-star generals.
And for those of you not in the military, E9, that's the highest rank for enlisted. Less than 1% of people who join the military end up as E9.
Right. And then Dennis also, too, after he got out of the Air Force, for about a decade, he was the program manager for the Department of Defense's Wounded Warrior Program.
Wow.
So for about 10 years, he more or less ran a large chunk of that operation that DOD had, taking care of, Marines and soldiers and airmen and sailors who were being wounded in Iraq and Afghanistan. So his heart, you can understand where his heart is. And always will be. But briefly, for a couple of years in between, he left his time leaving active duty and going to the Wounded Warrior Program, because he had been in the Pentagon. He got hired on as a contractor when he got off active duty to help declassify the documents surrounding the decision making for the Iraq War. So the documents coming out of Rumsfeld office, coming out of Wolfowitz's office, coming out of Doug Feiffel's office, so the 3 top people in the Department of Defense. And so he saw the decision-making there. He saw how it was flawed. He saw how this was a war that had no basis for it other than an ideological basis, a desire to take the Middle East, to remake the Middle East in a way that there is not opposition to American dominance, that there would be no threat to Israel. And so it's a really important book for people to read, because Dennis lays out, look, this is what we have on paper from the leadership of the Department of Defense as to why the Iraq War happened. Because what Dennis would say is that when he particularly working out of Bethesda and Walter Reed, being with these wounded young men and women, wounded, their families, and the question would come up about why, what was this for? What's it about? Right. And if it didn't come up directly, it was implied that this was all for a good reason. And Dennis is thinking there, saying there's not a good reason here. And so for anyone who's ever had a question about what the Iraq War was about, what was it for, why did they put this thing in motion, I encourage you to read Dennis's book, Deadly Betrayal.
Wow. Very powerful. So what did you learn about leadership when lives, not metrics, were on the line in Iraq?
Excuse me, I literally just swallowed a little bug.
Take your time.
The perils of live television, everyone, right?
Yes.
Excuse me. Bob, what that was for me about what I learned about the difference between leadership in combat and leadership when it's back in garrison, and it's based upon, are you getting your training schedule complete, or right, things like that. It's the finality of it. The finality of it. Outside of combat, unless you have a major mishap, you have an accident, which does happen. Military is dangerous in peacetime as well as in war, but the reality of that's it. That was the one chance you had.
Yes.
And if someone is killed, somebody loses their legs, that's it. There's no doing over again. There's no trying it again a different way tomorrow, right? You chose to go this route, and now that Humvee got hit, and that Marine lost his legs, and another one is going to have a metal rod in his leg for the rest of his life, and like on and on and on. Like those types of decisions, they're final. And I think that really is what's most poignant about leadership in warfare, is the severity of it, the sincerity of it, and the finality of it.
No, even in times of peace, there is a weight to command. I can't imagine during times of war in a combat zone. How did you deal with that heavy weight?
With the weight,
Yes.
I learned that I had to rest. I had to take care of myself. So when I was a company commander, and this is '06, particularly the fall, winter of that year, before the Anbar awakening occurred, the Sons of Iraq occurred, and we entered into a political settlement with the Sunnis, which is essentially what happens in end of '06, '07. It's not about sending more troops there; it's a political settlement. But the pace of it, right? At most nights, you're getting 3 hours of sleep, 4 hours of sleep if you're lucky, right? If you're lucky, and that type of pressure in everything I had to do. Again, my company was undermanned. I didn't have an executive officer. After I was over there, I did get another second lieutenant attached to me, but I was dual hatted as both the company commander and the regimental engineer. And so like it never stopped. And I had to give myself a break. I had to give myself space. Excuse me. I'm sorry about that bug.
Okay.
But what happened was a friend of mine had mailed me a box set of the television show Scrubs. People remember that show. And every night before I went to sleep, I put an episode on. I had my little Sony Tough Book or whatever laptop I had, then weighed about 14 pounds or whatever,
Yeah.
but it could play movies on a CD or DVD. And I would watch an episode of that TV show. And even if it was just, 22 minutes, 23 minutes, and even if I was going to get like 2 hours of sleep that night, I was going to do that, because I realized I needed that break. I needed to get my mind someplace else. I had to give my mind time off. And I think that's the thing that I took away from it. Not just the need to eat well, not just the need to continue to PT, but also to give yourself mentally space away from what you're doing. And it's so important to put yourself on a schedule and to enforce that schedule. And you'd think about it, if you had Marines or you had sailors who weren't doing what they needed to do, you'd be all over them. If you had Marines and sailors that were not getting enough sleep, that were only eating ice cream 3 times a day in the chow hall or whatever, you would get on them. And so you have to have that same discipline towards yourself, not just the eating, not just the PT, not just the sleep, but also to giving yourself mental space, because otherwise you're going to burn out, you're going to crash really hard, and you're not going to be helpful to anybody then.
That is so powerful. That's why every time you fly, they tell you, in case of emergency, take care of yourself first. Put the face mask on you,
Same
and then
principle.
you can take care of everybody else. That is so important. But sometimes, as leader, we do forget to do that. So, how did you build trust in a war zone with your Marines in an environment where uncertainty and danger were so constant?
Well, we also
Before you answer that too, for people who are not military, just so that I understand, you're saying you're only having 2 or 3 hours of sleep. It's not like you're doing it Monday through Friday and then you have Saturday and Sunday off, right? It's like every single
there's
day.
absolutely no time off. And
Exactly.
it was this, for me, it was, splitting time between being a company commander, so needing to be out with the Marines doing the operations, could carry these things out as well as just seeing what's happening. But then also too, as the regimental engineer, and we had a major operation in RAO in November, December. It was a preparation, a shaping operation for the surge that was to come in 2007. But it essentially ended up commanding a 300 engineer task force. Had Marines, I had soldiers assigned to me. I had a Navy CB heavy equipment platoon attached to me. I had airmen attached to me.
Wow.
And so I had this 300 person engineer task force with probably about 100 pieces of rolling stock, all told.
Wow.
It was massive, and it should have been commanded by a colonel, by an 06, right? So one level below general. That's and my regimental commander, who I've recently reconnected with because he's trying to help one of my Marines who went out every day looking for IEDs by driving over them, essentially as part of a route clearance team, get a Purple Heart. Because he certainly deserves one in the traumatic brain injury issues he's going through right now. So been reconnected with him recently, trying to get that accomplished. But my regimental commander had that confidence in me. The higher headquarters, so what we call the Marine Expeditionary Force, they said we need to send a colonel. You can't have a captain doing this job. And Colonel Krause said, no, Captain Hoh is my guy, and no one's coming here to replace him. And so it was that pressure there. Because I had that support was pretty intense, right? But also too, because I had that support, I was able to perform like that. So
that's powerful.
Yeah, but in the sense of building that you've got to listen to people. You've got to do all the core aspects of leadership. You got to listen to people.
Yes.
You've got to show up. You've got to be present. You've got to support them if they need something. You've got to get them right. Get them it. But I think the biggest thing for me that year was communication. So our area of operation in Western Anbar Province, it was 30,000 square miles. So our regiment covered an area the size of South Carolina.
Wow.
So I had Marines across all of that. And so staying in touch with them, which was very difficult. I used probably about 6 or 7 different ways to talk to people: VHF radio, UHF radio, satellite telephone, regular cell phones, email, classified email, right? As well as a voice over internet. Every place my Marines were, it seemed like one.
So basically everything but smoke signal, right?
Yeah, exactly. Essentially that, and we were understaffed. So I had as my platoon commanders, supporting this regiment. And so we had, essentially not platoons out, but elements out or detachments out, led by staff sergeants, so E5, so mid-grade enlisted. But these were supposed to be led by more senior Marines, and I didn't have that. I had I had junior staff sergeants, Marines who just became. So it was supporting them and showing them that they had my trust, right? And I think that is the biggest thing: is demonstrating that you trust them.
Yes.
Right. And I had nothing. And part of it was there's nothing else I can do. There was no one else. Staff Sergeant Elsie, you are the company gunny, because you're the company gunnery sergeant, because there's no one else. And so you have to do it, whether you know what to do or not. You have to do it. Sergeant Booz, you are our maintenance chief. And I know this is supposed to be done by a master sergeant, and you're supposed to have a maintenance officer here with us because we've got so much here. But you've got to figure it out, Sergeant Booz. And, and then whatever they need, however you can support them, you do. But it's that communicating and in that building that trust that you are going to be there for them. I think that's what you have to constantly do. You cannot let them down. And again, it's a stairwell thing. And you know what? You've got to figure out a way to be as responsive to your subordinates as you are to your bosses. And, your bosses are the ones that write your fitness reports. Your bosses are the ones who are going to, they're the ones who are going to matter when it comes time for promotions and your next assignment and so on and so forth. Your junior Marines, your enlisted Marines, your NCOs, your staff NCOs, they have no bearing on your future. But if you want to, as we were talking about before, have any honor in any of this, you want to be what a Marine officer is supposed to be. You want to lead, and then more importantly, you want your mission to be successful, then you have to do everything possible to support your Marines as they need it. And so that requires a heck of a lot of communication, a lot of trust, particularly when you've got Marines, again, spread over an area the size of South Carolina.
That is really, really powerful because you reminded me. I just interviewed General Robert Caslen. He wrote the book "The Impossible Mission," right? The Office of Security Cooperation and the U.S. Force
Ah,
drawdown in Iraq. It really was an impossible mission that you guys
right.
were asked for. And again, in your case, you had a lot of junior officers. Yourself, you being one, an O3, a captain, not an
Yep.
O6, a colonel who's only one promotion away from being a flag officer, but then also taking care of your people. No? And then it goes back to another book, the general wrote, The Character Edge, Leading and Winning with Integrity, which is what we're talking about, character and integrity, honor. Either you've got it or you don't, but definitely in the military, they put us in an environment where we are able to develop those core values. It's what really makes me. I am so grateful because there is a big difference, right, between what happened in the industry and what we do in the military. For you to build that trust so that a junior enlisted person would follow you wherever you go,
Right.
knowing full well that they could put their life on the line and still follow and still try to accomplish that mission, which is greater than all of us put together. That is really sacred. That is. I can't find the word to describe it.
Well, it's necessary. You have to have that in order for the team to work, right? But I see it myself. As I said, Colonel Crowell, regimental commander, said, "No, Captain Ho's my guy. No one's coming here to take his job from him. He's my guy." And that trust that he put in me.
Yes.
I mean, I'll go to my grave remembering that. That he was willing. I mean, like he could have, because if something bad got happened and this captain screwed this up, right? Who was that going to fall on? It wasn't going to fall on the captain. It was going to fall on the regimental commander who told the MEF staff, "Go pound sand. You're not sending somebody here."
Yes.
Right. So Colonel Kraut put himself out there. He could have, but I got obviously I demonstrated myself to him. He liked me, he respected me, but by establishing that trust with me like that, and then I also understood what my role was, that I have to communicate to him. So just as the same thing on communicating down, you've got to communicate up.
Yes.
So, okay, sir, we are the main effort for the whole Corps in Iraq. Like our operation, we were the main effort in Iraq for about 2 months. I mean, that's a pretty big deal. Right? I mean, so I have to communicate to him constantly, keep him informed, let him know what's going well, what's not going well, what do we need, sometimes what we don't need, because as we had success, we had some units showing up that were sent to take part so they could take part in this big operation. And I had to call him and say, "Hey, sir, can you call and have these guys sent home? Because I don't need them here. I don't want them here." I mean, stuff like people will think people who are in the military won't. It really does things like that happen.
Yes.
Literally, units would show up as we're conducting this major operation because they want to take part in the operation. Right? It's called Al Majid was called the operation. And so so you had things like that as well.
That is man, I can't believe this. It's been almost an hour.
I know.
Can you stay another 15, 20 minutes, or do you have?
Absolutely. No. I'm good until 2:00.
Okay. Thank you. Because I think what you are sharing is so very important. So few people have experienced it, especially people on the civilian side, and you really bring a lot of insight, and at the same time teaching true leadership, right? Because what you're talking about is providing top cover. The best commanding officers I've had are those officers who didn't care about their own career. Because I think there are two kinds of officers in the Navy, probably in the Marine Corps too. There are a few, they just care about me, myself, and I, right? They want to get with it. They want to do whatever they can to get to the next level. And they're going to use their people, their department head and their senior enlisted folks in order to step on them and get the promotion. But they will never take responsibility when there is a mistake. Because as a true leader, anybody under you makes a mistake, you should take all of the blame, right? Anybody does something right, you should share all of the glory with the entire team. But anyway, it's easier to say that than to actually do it in practice. And the few officers I've seen, commanding officer, who've done that for me, I mean, I will follow them everywhere they go, no questions asked, right? Because it is so rare to see people put their own career on the line for you. There's just nothing like it. So What is maybe one of the misconceptions that civilian or even policymakers have about war or leadership from your experience in Iraq?
That there's individualism,
Mm,
right? That there are heroes in the sense of the way they're portrayed in the movies or in popular lore, or that
yeah,
it centers around one person or one name when it really the
so,
idea of the team. And I
yeah.
think that's why Bob TV series like Band of Brothers
Hmm.
or Generation Kill, both HBO shows,
Yeah.
uh, got it right. Not because they were correct technically or their depiction of combat was accurate,
Hmm.
or as accurate as you can kind of get. But because it showed the depth of the experience, because it showed how broad the experience it is.
Yes.
Certainly, when you're in command, there's a weight upon you. You have a responsibility and obligation, but nothing you do is of your own making.
Mm,
It's those who are your subordinates who are the ones who are executing. Right.
yes.
So there's no individualism. I mean, your name might be attached to something, but certainly it is the success is borne by
Mm,
those you are leading, and
yes.
not by you. And then the mark of leadership then is like, can you engender that success? But the
Wow.
idea that there's some type of individualism in this, that it is one person, essentially a cult,
Mm,
and it's when you get into cult personalities. And this is what
yes.
I'm very critical of many of our generals from these wars. And from what I was able to observe, were
Yes.
essentially cult of personalities, that they were
Mm,
surrounded by sycophants, and then when you look at what the results were from their leadership, these were lost wars. But we
wow.
know their names though, don't we? And they go to the Super Bowl and they flip the coin to start the game at the Super Bowl, right? But they've lost the wars, right? I
Mm,
mean, I think there's the very real connection there between those whose names we don't know and those names we do know, and who
yes.
actually gets results. And so, but I think it's this idea of individualism. There's really no place for it, and those who were successful in combat, as successful as you can be, were those who were the least individualistic, I believe.
Wow, that is quite insightful. Did your perspective change between Iraq and Afghanistan?
Um, it changed when I got to Afghanistan. So I had a tough time with the wars, the reasoning for the wars. I was very much morally and intellectually broken by the time I got to Afghanistan, but I had a lot of thoughts about what I wanted my career to be. I had a lot of thoughts about continuing to contribute, that I was relatively a junior person. And, when I'm a senior person, then I won't let these mistakes happen again. Just as like I
Mm,
heard all the Vietnam, when I joined the Marine Corps, we still had colonels and generals and
yeah.
sergeants major who had been in Vietnam, and they all swore we would never have another Vietnam. And then we had two, right?
Mm,
So, I think what happened for me, though, going to Afghanistan and going into the State Department, being appointed into the Foreign Service, which was really quite an honor. The
yeah.
year I was appointed in the Foreign Service, only one other person was, and that's because I had worked for the State Department before. I had been part of the embassy team in Iraq, and then had been on the Iraq desk at state, so people
Yes.
knew me. And so, uh, but when I got to Afghanistan, my thoughts, Bob, were this hope that the war in Afghanistan was going to be fundamentally different than the war in Iraq, and
Mm,
it just simply wasn't. It wasn't. We can go into the details, we can go into the histories, we can go into the
yes.
geography, we can go. I mean, we can lose sight of the forest because of the trees, but the
Hmm.
reality was is that war was fundamentally no different when it comes to levels of warfare. And this is a big
Yes.
thing that I talk about a lot, because it seems that something so simple as the levels of warfare are just ignored or thrown out or dismissed because it's inconvenient. Americans were
Mhm.
very good at tactical and operational levels of warfare. Strategic, we are poor at, and political, we are terrible at. And that's
Yeah.
the explanation, briefly, as to why the United States can't win wars. And so I saw the same thing occurring there in Afghanistan.
Okay, we are going to dig deep into this. I think we're going to end the show with this. This is probably going to be one of the most impactful, I think, or insightful part of the show. Because in the show, I want to make sure we are honest and we talk about difficult things, right? Because we are leaders. That's what we are supposed to do, and not just pretend that everything is fine when it really isn't. So before I do, let me check the chat and see what people are saying. Let me see. Daniel says, let me see. Roman, Daniel Young is very articulate on all of the shows he is on and knows current event as well as anyone. Uh, that is true. And Roman also says it's amazing to see you in a different light compared to your other shows. And I believe this is my see daddy, Joel. I call him Joel now, but Captain Rothschild, like I've known him since I was in IT3. He says, I remember reading issues of Economic with Matt and the State Department. Oh, no, that's not him. That's your
But Bill,
friend.
I guess that's
Yeah.
Bill. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
this is my study. It says, Matt, your background and story really resonate with me. My values came from my family and Boy Scout, where we were taught to live things better than you found them. That led me into search and rescue, EMS, and ultimately the Navy. So he became a Navy captain, my sea daddy captain, Joel Rothschild. Now, this is another thing. In the Navy, we say captain. That's 06, the equivalent of colonel. I was on board.
You know, it was great, Bob. When I was
Yeah.
in the Secretary of Navy's office,
Yeah.
I was Captain Matthew Hoh, and
Yeah.
I would call places
Uh-huh.
on behalf of the Secretary saying,
Yeah.
"This is Captain Hoh," and if we call all those calling Marine units, Captain Hoh from the Secretary of Navy's office, and I get some colonel, you know, some lieutenant colonel, some major, and he'd be like, "Oh, yes, sir. What can I do for you?"
Exactly.
And I always let it go. I'd always like just I very
You're a
rarely would I
smart
correct
man.
him. Like, "Oh no, Marine Corps captain." I just make pretend I didn't hear him, you know, because I knew I was taking advantage of it. Yeah, so there was that. Yeah, big
That's
difference
so
between a
powerful.
captain in the Marine Corps and a captain in the Navy. Very, very big difference.
Yeah, I have a similar story. I was on board the USSX in 2007. I was just an ensign about to become a lieutenant JG or two. And somebody told me, hey, Captain so wants to talk to you. I was so scared. I was out of my mind. I'm like, what in the world? I'm going to come to find out it was a Marine captain. Just
Right,
like,
exactly.
are you crazy? But yeah, that is a good one. All right. Okay, another comment we just said, we all see the weaknesses and fault of our government at all level. My question, especially considering that you left the Marine Corps and the State Department, do you think it is easier or more effective to effect change from within an organization? Hold on, let me continue this on LinkedIn. I believe that's Captain Rothschild is asking you the question. Let me go there. Okay. Hold on a second. Come on. Sometimes when I am on LinkedIn, it shows it as the most relevant, not the most recent. Let me change that. Just a second. Okay. All right. So, do you think it is easier or more effective to effect change from within an organization or from the outside? That's the question.
I think it depends upon where you are in comparison to where the level of decision making is being made.
Okay.
So if you're talking about on your ship, you're talking about in your battalion or in your brigade or regiment, you know, in your office, right? Whatever you're in, it depends upon the distance between you and decision making. In terms of me, from my resignation over the Afghan war, obviously I was, you know, not going to be able to influence that by staying in. I was actually offered the opportunity. If people who aren't familiar with my story, I resigned in protest over the escalation of the Afghan war in 2009. And one of the reasons why I'm still sitting here talking to people 17 years later. But, you know, I was offered that opportunity to join Ambassador Holbrook's staff. And as Holbrook said, you write stuff for the president, you know, every week. And I had already done that at the State Department on their Iraq desk. I authored I coordinated the publication of what's called the weekly status report. And, you know, that went to the president, that went to the vice president, that went to the Secretary of State, you know, in understanding how these institutions operate. And the inability for things to get through unfiltered, or even just to have any chance against the inertia that is present, as well to understanding how decisions are made at that senior level, the politics involved.
Yes.
Right. I mean, if you go, I recommend people who want to have a good handle on President Obama's decision to escalate the war in Afghanistan in 2009, I urge you to read Bob Woodward's book, Obama's Wars. And you see that he is just under pressure from all sides to escalate the war. He has no support, and he doesn't want to do it. But he's given no choice, essentially. If people remember in the fall of 2009, he he's given escalation options, and he throws them all back and says, "Give me
Yes.
something else. This is garbage." But he
Yeah.
had no support. So understanding like the inertia. I have to point out the politics as you read that book and you read stuff that if you know this stuff, that's classified. It shouldn't be.
Mhm.
Bloomberg shouldn't be publishing that. And
Yes.
but what's not present in that book is the politics. Where's the discussions about the Afghan war politically that Obama would have been having with his chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel? Where's the
Yes.
discussions about the Afghan war that David Axelrod would have been having with the president about, what are the consequences politically, boss, if you withdraw troops, you don't listen to General Petraeus and General McChrystal and Secretary Clinton and Secretary Gates.
Yeah.
None of us who would listen to any of those people now, if you have a head on your shoulder, you wouldn't, right? But back then, you're going to go against them. And then what happens if somebody blows up a bomb in Times Square after you start this? You're going to be, and you're not going to win re-election because you're going to be soft on terror. Right.
Yes.
And you're right. I mean, and so there's, I think, get back to this question. It's your distance, your proximity to the actual decision makers. But certainly within organizations where you have that ability to influence change, whether through its inspiration or whether it's through just persistence, I think some of it is like I said before. I've always got good pearls of wisdom that I can fall back on from mentors, just like always prepare like it's your court martial. But I've got another mentor who taught me blossom where you're planted. No matter what you're doing, always do your best, because you never know down the line when that reputation as someone who was given, a terrible thing to do, did well with it the best that they could, when that's going to come back up in your favor, right? As well as it's your job. Do your job, any type of thing. So I think there's a lot of examples of how to do those types of thing. And then the other thing I would say, to the other one that I've always kind of gone by is don't die on a small cross. Right.
Wow.
If you know that this is going to be a battle, if you know what you're up against, if you know that you are in for a fight, make it a worthwhile fight, make it a good fight. Right. But don't die on a small cross. Don't exhaust the ammunition you have. Don't exhaust the capital that you have with your boss, with your boss's boss, over something that you yourself can actually live with, or it's not really causing an issue to anybody. Right. So pick your battle.
Wow. All right, you definitely died on a big cost. So for this last segment, thanks so much for giving us time today. I don't want to abuse your time, but I do want to get through this, and we're gonna end the show after this. I think this is very telling, and I'm hoping the junior officers listening now or senior enlisted could really learn something from your example. Because I want to shift into a part of your journey that really requires a different kind of leadership, right? One that very few people will ever face. You served your country in uniform and out of uniform. You led Marines in combat. We talked about Iraq, but you also worked at the highest levels of policy in the State Department. And in 2009, you made a decision that wasn't about tactic. It wasn't about conscience. You actually resigned. And that was on the eve, right, on the 8th anniversary of 9/11.
Right.
And you wrote this letter. It's actually a 4-page resignation letter. I'm sure you will forever remember that. All 4 pages. I believe the Secretary of State was Hillary Clinton, and Obama was the president. But for 4 pages, you really explain why you just couldn't stay in the State Department, and you made a decision that would really affect your own life, and I am assuming your well-being as well, your personal pocketbook. So the internal conflict, I guess, can you take us back, not just to the decision, but to the internal conflict? What were you wrestling with in those final weeks or months before you made the decision? I just can't live with this. I have to resign with honor.
Well, like I said earlier, Bob, I realized that the Afghan war is fundamentally no different than the Iraq war. And so here I was again, taking part in something I didn't believe in, taking part in something I knew was ultimately futile, something that would possibly make things worse. So that intellectual dishonesty, the moral dishonesty. I had been to, plenty of funerals. I'd run across the mothers and fathers traveling through the United States, and you'd see them, particularly in 07, 08. You'd be in the airport and you'd see this couple, and they'd be holding that cardboard triangular box, which you knew exactly what that was. They were traveling with a flag they had been given because their son or daughter had just been buried during a military ceremony. And I mean, so those experiences and telling them that it was worth it, right? And not being, I can't lie anymore about this. I can't go home and tell somebody that their son died for something worthwhile. Or, I've spoken to my friends who were killed, their children, and the idea that these kids, Train McLeod's kids, are growing up without a dad. For what purpose? And this idea of taking part in something I know is wrong. So there's an intellectual dishonesty and a moral dishonesty. And then what happens is I read a column by Bob Herbert from the New York Times, and this is, I guess, in July of 09. And it's at the time that Robert McNamara, who was Lyndon Johnson's Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War, and McNamara, of course, who had a very large mea culpa before he died about the Vietnam War, admitted that they lied the entire time, et cetera. Herbert wrote about that and said that doesn't matter. It matters in what you do in the moment, right? And something like that. So if you're in this position, it matters when you know something is wrong, if you continue doing it. This is not talking about the decisions of 19-year-olds here. We're talking about the decision of grown men and women. And so that really impacted me. And I asked my dad about it. And my dad, the advice he gave me would stay with me through life. And that gave me the courage to remove myself from something I didn't believe in, something that I knew as professional was not going to work, something that all those around me knew was not going to work. I mean, that example after example of after I resign and I'm public about it, of running into people from different parts of the government. Well, I'll give you one thing. So what happens is after I resign, the Washington Post publishes a major story about my resignation. It's front page above the fold. It's a huge deal. A couple of days later, I'm on PBS NewsHour. I'm on the Today Show. I'm on with Fareed Zakaria. It's a big, big deal. But anyway, I asked Karen DeYoung, who wrote that article, why did you give me so much space? It's like 3,000 words. Like, why did you do this? And she said, well, because I spoke to all the people, everyone I spoke to at the State Department, at the White House, so the NSC, at CIA, at Department of Defense, when I asked them about what you were saying, none of them disagreed with you. Right. So, and I found that I could give you a dozen different examples of other stories like that.
Yes.
So, that confidence. The other thing though, because we are talking about leadership, I should talk about this too. One of the reasons why I was able to do it, Bob, was because I was a State Department political officer. I was on a provincial reconstruction team. And I was the co-leader of that team with the military commander. We also had a USAID counterpart. But my relationship with the military commander was great. And I really was the co-leader. It was a terrific role there. But everybody worked for the military commander. I had no one assigned to me. I had nobody that I was overseeing or supervising or responsible for. I didn't have any obligations personally. And so I was able to leave in that way. If I couldn't have done it if I had just even one person who I was responsible for. I couldn't have left them. I couldn't have quit on them, if you will. And so being in the role I was in, not having any responsibilities in that sense, I was able to quit. Yes. And that was my intention when I did it. My intention wasn't to become, this type of thing and get involved in think tanks and public policy and things like that. Yes. My intention really was to quit the wars because I was intellectually and morally, broken.
Wow. And do you think your moral courage partly came from your father? I think you said his name was Andy. Is in his 90s now, still alive? Yeah. And also, can you share the advice he gave you that would stay with you for the rest of your life, if you are willing?
Yeah. I mean, basically, it was excuse me, pretty simple. His, the thoughts echoing what Herbert said in that column, but the fact that McNamara was an evil man. Anyone who would lie like that for his own purposes, to make that calculation that Well, for my purposes, it's better for thousands of young Americans, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese and Cambodians and Laos
Mm.
as well, to die in this war for my political purposes, my political expediency, the possibility of me taking on and getting a job at the World Bank or whatever when I retire.
Wow.
Looking at defense, right? Like that type of thing. And that was the calculations that I often had, Bob, was like, well,
Mm.
if I stay in this role, then I can get this role later. And I had my thoughts. I was going to stay. My thought was actually to extend for a half a year or so in Afghanistan, and then go to Harvard's Kennedy School, and then
Mhm.
get go leave the foreign service. I didn't have an interest in being a foreign service officer, but then get a 15 position, because that's what I was eligible for. Get a
Yes.
GS-15 position at a civil service, either at state or CIA or DOD, and eventually become an assistant secretary of defense or what have you. That was
Mhm.
my career path. That's what I wanted to do. And then I wanted to
Yes.
also get a PhD in history and teach at a community college when I retired. Like, that was my thoughts about how it was going to go. But to get there, I had to keep going along with something I knew
Yes.
was wrong. Also knew it wasn't going to work. You want to put more soldiers in here. What are these folks, these Pashtun areas are going to do? They're going to further support the
Mm.
Taliban, right? I mean, you have no interest in making a political settlement with them. This is just going to be a war until you leave. That's it. I mean, put my analysis very simply, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that is really something, because you definitely had something you had to pay personally for the decision you made. And again, to be very clear, you did that because you loved your country. Um, I guess the question, the follow-on question I want to ask is, in the letter, I think it was in the first paragraph there, you talked about, if I can get back to it, people who are watching may not be able to see, but I am just going to read a portion of that. It really touched me a lot while I was preparing for this episode. Uh, what you said is, you had lost understanding of and confidence in the strategic purposes of a mission. So that's not a small statement. It carries weight for every service member on the ground. How did you carry that responsibility knowing others were still deployed and serving?
It was very hard to do that. It was very hard to quit, if you will. And I felt I was letting people down, right? And to this day, and this is something we can get into if you want to talk about the uh, uh, psychological reality of groupthink, and how it's a societal, it's part of our societal evolution, why we have groupthink, why we have mob mentality, why
Mhm.
we act from peer pressure. To this day, 17 years later, I still expect to hear from somebody telling me off. If I get an email from
Mm.
somebody who I was with in the Marines or whatnot years ago, I
Wow.
expect the email to be, you betrayed us, you're a traitor, you let us down. I mean, that's the
Mm.
unconscious thought that comes to my head, that comes out of the back of my brain someplace, that I have no control over. It just floats up, even all these years later. And I can tell
Wow.
you that the ratio of people who have supported me versus not supporting me, people saying thank you, or I appreciate what you said, or hey, I agree to those who, writing go to hell. I
Mm.
mean, the ratio is probably 500 to 1. I mean,
Wow.
it's very, I mean, I certainly have gotten those things, but like there should be no reason in my head for me
Mhm.
still to have these thoughts 17 years later, that people are going to be upset with me for
Yes.
resigning, for quitting. But it's still there. It's still there. And that's a really important thing to understand, is this idea of groupthink, and the idea of leaving a community, leaving population, leaving your clan, your
Mhm.
unit, your whatever. It's really difficult for people to do, and that's because of evolution. Because back for our
Wow.
ancestors, if you didn't agree with the chief, you weren't going to be sitting by the fire. You're going to
Yes.
be out in the woods with the wolves, right? You know what I mean? So
Mm.
that's one of the reasons. And there's all types of evidence out there. People who are interested in this, I encourage you to look up the Ash conformity experiments from the 1950s, just absolutely crazy things where people will knowingly say things they know are wrong to remain in the group. It's an incredibly powerful dynamic, and it's something that I still feel. I still resonates with me, even though there's no reason for me to think that way. It's still
Yes.
there. Yeah.
Wow, that is really crazy. So even 17 years later, how do you deal with it? How do you cope?
Well, I mean, at this point, I'm so used to it. I know what it is, but it's but it now it's more of a curiosity, right, than it is anything else. The idea that I'll see something, say from a Marine, someone I was in the Marines with years ago, and there'll be like this little bit of anxiety. There'll be this little tremble in my chest, before I open the email, on this expectation that this is going to be negative. And like I said, almost always it's positive. There have plenty of negative things happened. I mean,
Wow.
with those, but certainly the support, because I think I think the disagreement over that war that I had, the dissent that I have, and if people are interested in an articulation of why I dissented, what my analysis of the war was, I'd encourage you to watch the film Bodyguard of Lies, which is on Paramount, streaming on Paramount, and that gets into more detail. I explain my opposition to the war, from an analytical perspective. But yeah, I mean, this I'll just leave it at that. I think that's probably good. Oh, I think I lost you.
Yes, I think you are back.
Okay, all right. But I was just wrapping up there. But yeah.
Yeah, you were mentioning Bodyguard of Lies.
Right. Yeah. So that's a film on Paramount I was in last year. It goes into it explores the lies of 4 presidential administrations that sustained the war in Afghanistan for 20 years. And if people are more interested in my critique of the war from an analytical or professional perspective, they can find it there.
Yeah. Now, again, I guess your official title was Senior Civilian Representative for the Zabul province in Afghanistan, right there. And when we go back again to your letter, I think it's really a case study. One question I have for you is, there's a part of your letter that's incredibly powerful, right? Because you speak about families,
Yeah.
sacrifice, and the difficulty of assuring that those losses really had a purpose. What was going through your heart as you wrote those words?
There is a lot of anger. There's a lot of anger, and there's a lot of sorrow. Um, in I So after in the experience after McNamara's death, and I'm kind of this is put in front of me about the choices I am making. As a political officer with the State Department of Afghanistan, that doesn't compare at all to Secretary of Defense during Vietnam. But for me at that point, certainly was presented that way. Then it's a couple months of trying to get the courage to do what I knew was right, to leave the war. And it's one example of another of things coming up. It's dead civilian kids, dead Afghan kids. I mean, there's one teenage boy that we had to repatriate, just the look on his face, as well as another boy who going up to the hospital with the governor, and the surgeons got, the kid's guts pulled out of him, like that type of stuff. It's things you've seen before, and that you always excused away, you always explained away, you put behind a door in the back of your head. And I didn't have that capacity any longer. But other things too. One was just again, look, I was a student of this stuff. I read everything I possibly could about this war, and that's one of the things that I will say. I want to get a point across for those who didn't take part, and maybe particularly for civilians. The number of men and women I was with in Iraq and Afghanistan, or in DC working on Iraq and Afghanistan, who had never read a book about Iraq or Afghanistan is incredible. The lack of literacy, the lack of historical knowledge, the understanding, and most of those who did have a historical knowledge, it was very much limited to our view, our experience. So people may have read about Afghanistan since 9/11, and they would
Mhm.
frame the war in that way, that the war started in September of 2001. And if you talk to the Afghans, they go back to 1973 when the king is deposed, right? I
Yes.
mean, so it's like that that failure to understand the context, the background, the history, as well as
Mm.
placing themselves as a prime actor on the stage. And it's one of the
Yes.
things I think one of the things I say in that
Mhm.
letter. Um, but
Wow.
I also too. So it's just the fact that this is not going to work. That we are
Mhm.
not going to win the way by adding foreign forces and sending more money to a corrupt and predatory government composed of warlords and drug lords. We are not going to win this war. We're only going to push more people to the Taliban.
Yeah.
But then the other thing too is just our own, Bob, our own. Uh, give you an example. I go to presidential elections in Afghanistan, August of 09, and we pushed 20,000 more troops into Afghanistan really quick, and we've got kids losing their legs, losing their testicles,
Mm.
bleeding out in Kandahar and Helmand and up in Nangarhar and other places, because these elections have to be successful. They have to be free and fair elections, right? We're sending hundreds of bodies home every month for that purpose. That's the stated purpose. That's what the president of the United States is saying. And
Mm.
meanwhile, the elections come. I'm not allowed to go to a polling place as a State Department officer. The Afghan government says the U.S. is off limits. It's a way to try and make it seem like it's impartial, but really it's a way to hide what's occurring. I
Mm.
go over to the Afghan military base and I walk into a building, and the conference room, they've got the large buckets where the ballots would be put in, these big Tupperware buckets, and the Afghan soldiers are just stuffing the ballot boxes, right?
Mm.
And so when I report this back to the embassy, the response I got, I'm going to paraphrase it. I wish I had saved it. And this would be a recommendation for people who are in these experiences: save everything, document everything, write journals, save
Yeah.
your emails. You're going to want them later. Your memory is not going to be as good as it once was, let me tell you. But the response from the embassy when I told them about this ballot stuffing I observed was that what you saw was it was an unregistered polling station. Therefore, it was not part of the official process. So we're not concerned about this report.
Hmm.
Right? That was what the U.S. Embassy said back when I reported that type of
Wow.
ballot box stuffing. I mean, like, it was that type of, and then juxtaposed with, hey, how many kids died today in Kandahar and Helmand,
So
in
sad.
Patika, right? Et cetera, in Kunar, because of these elections. Because that's the latest line
Mm.
we have now. We're here. We're doing this to establish a democracy, free and fair elections. We've
Yeah.
kind of given up on the 9/11 thing. It doesn't hit, right? I mean, so
Hmm.
yeah. And so it was those things that continue to roll. And I'm trying to build the courage to do it. And it was
Yes.
finally enough is enough. And when I made a decision, I wasn't sleeping, and I was very irritable and things like that. But
Yeah. Can
I
imagine.
made it. Yeah, yeah,
Wow. But there's something else you said in an interview I watched preparing for this that kind of stuck with me. You talked about how difficult it was because as a Marine, you don't walk away from a fight. So
yeah.
how did you reconcile that identity as a Marine with the decision to
I
step
think
away?
it was because of the state my mind and my soul was in, right? The state that I was in election. And when I broke, and I looked back at myself and I said, this is what you took part in. You took part in this Iraq war. You took part in this Afghan war. You saw it as a way to progress your career. You saw it as you taking part in, the big events of history. I mean, all the lies I told myself about how, okay, I'm doing this because I'm a better officer than others, and I'll bring guys back home alive, or I'll be a
Mm.
moral actor in my little. I'll create good around me, And I think by '09 I had come to understand that there's very limited agency in war. You
Yeah.
think you're going to be a moral agent, and the reality is that war will make you an agent for its purposes when it feels like this. This is one of the things I feel that people don't appreciate about war, particularly say our policymakers, that war is a superhuman force. It
Mm.
always has been and always will be. And the idea of controlling or managing war for your purposes, your belief that you can manipulate it to achieve
Yes.
an outcome, the history books are littered with the examples of that. And of course, now we're witnessing this war against Iran, and that same fundamental coming out. War is a superhuman force. You cannot control it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, the getting to that point where I was able to walk away was very difficult. And then once I did, it was very painful. And, the feeling, I remember I had a friend of mine, Mike Weston, who was killed in Afghanistan, not long after I left Afghanistan. And I went to his memorial service in Quantico, Virginia, and we were company commanders together, and great guy. And I being at the memorial service, I had to really reconcile my place now, and I had to come to a position where the reasons why I'm doing this is to prevent people like my friend Mike from dying. Like, here's his wife. This is her life ahead of her now. He's not here. And he didn't, in all of speeches made that day about how he had died for our country, died for our interests, died to protect our freedoms. All those that's lies. That's garbage. That's nonsense. And all I know is that, Mike's family and all the countless other families I know, were they sustained by these lies? And I'm in a position then to at least not go along with it. And I found the ability to fight it and try and correct it and do something different and at least dissent. I was able to create a career that way, if you will. Hasn't always been. It's not financially fruitful for anyone who's interested in that type of thing. But but the anger. So I mean, there's so much that of what I do is still that same anger, Bob. Right? Because it's a dereliction of duty. These men and women who lead these forces, these men and women who lead this country, who so willingly commit and cause others to sacrifice for their political gains. Well, there's nothing I could, maybe it's because of how I was raised. Maybe it's because of all that media I consumed, all the books I read, got these thoughts in my head, and now I can't live with myself if I don't dissent.
Yes.
And some of it's cultural. I'm a kid from New Jersey and New York, so I got a big mouth anyway, that type of stuff. But yeah, it is. It's so, yeah.
Wow, that is not easy, because you've also shared how this decision has made you physically ill at times too, right?
Right.
It wasn't just intellectual or deeply personal.
And that is something you will see within. I don't consider myself a whistleblower, but I end up in the same camp as whistleblowers all the time, and I'm part of organizations with them and everything. You see that the physical cost of being a whistleblower, of going against the group, right, of being a truth teller, a loud mouth, however you want to describe it.
Well, I call it moral courage.
Yeah, the moral courage to demonstrate that. There's absolutely a financial and a career cost. There's a physical cost. People develop illness. It's this idea of the stress that you are under because you left the group. But then as well, too, there is, the psychological and psychiatric costs. Oftentimes that leads into substance abuse, secondary issues like depression. But this idea, you'd mentioned something to me about how I think you early on you said something about the difference between physical and moral courage, and I think the difference is that physical courage causes you to act because you're afraid of what people will say if you don't act, right? Moral courage causes you to act because you're afraid of what people will say if you do act, right? Wow. So when I had those moments of physical courage, this idea of, you're not afraid. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of fear. Yes. And that's absolutely 100% the case, but I know that for me, like if in combat, whether it be, I remember one time being in Haditha and we're on a gunfight. And I remember just thinking, like, it'd be really nice just to stay here until this is over. We're up against a team size element. There's like one dude with like a RPK machine gun, another guy with an RPG. They're going to leave soon. I can just stay here and it'll be fine, right? Hunker behind this wall. Wow. And then the thoughts that were there were, what will people say if you do that? as well as the other thought was like, that's not your job. Get up and do your job. Right.
Mm.
But it kind of comes back to this idea of what are you going to say about yourself, your identity? You're a Marine Corps officer and you hid behind this wall, or you could get up and you try and lead your Marines. Or the other one was, what are people going to say about you as well because you hid by that wall? Now, moral courage is the opposite, where your fear is what people will say if you do act. So if
Yes.
I do say something, if I do step out, if I do quit, what
Hmm.
are people going to say about me?
That's
Right. And
powerful.
that's what binds you.
Wow.
So, physical courage, I think the fear may be what motivates you, right?
Yes.
While moral courage is the fear that binds you.
Mhm.
And the two things are different. And I'm not gonna glamorize moral courage over physical courage. I was scared plenty of times. The time I almost died, and somebody said something about it, and I said he was a major, and I said, "Sir, you know what? The reality is, as I just learned, you can do I'm sure every third word was a curse word. But like, you could do a heck of a lot
Mhm.
when you're scared like I was, and that's
Wow.
right. I mean, when you're in that position where it is that type of life or death.
Yes.
But yeah. So, but the moral courage is something that,
Hmm.
we certainly don't see enough of,
Sure.
we sadly don't see enough of.
So feel the fear and do it anyway. Wow. Did you feel lonely in that moment when you made that decision? Did you feel alone or did you feel
No,
the
and I did it.
responsibility to
I
take
did
it?
at first, and so what happened was my resignation letter goes to my boss in Kandahar, and my boss says, "Huh, I wouldn't write it this way, but I can't disagree with you," and sends it to
Mm.
the embassy. And then it goes to the embassy and it goes around the embassy like wildfire. And the lady who I report to at the embassy, who's responsible for all of us political officers who are out in the provinces, right? So she's taking in all the reports. She probably has the best perspective of the war in the State Department of anybody. She
Mhm.
writes me back and says, "This is incredible. I mean, I completely agree." Then I'm leaving.
Wow.
I'm going back up to the embassy. I got to meet Ambassador Eikenberry, who was the ambassador at the time. And I fly back up with my counterparts from Helmand, or from either Helmand or Kandahar and Urzgan, the guy, USAID guy, or Urzgan.
Mhm.
And they're both telling me how great this thing I wrote was. The guy from Kandahar is like, I would be right with you, but I got 2 kids going to college in a couple of years.
Mm.
My friend who's up in Nuristan, she's writing me the same thing. I go in, I have to meet with, the U.S. Embassy in Afghanistan was a weird beast in '09. We had what's called a deputy ambassador, which you don't have anywhere. A guy named Richie O'Delly or Richie O'Dono. I can't remember off the top of my head. And anyway, he became ambassador to Turkey or Greece or someplace.
Yeah.
But he said to me, I have to go in and talk to him. And he says, I've got military age children, and I would not let them serve in this war. And then I
Mm.
go and meet with the ambassador, who I met with a number of times the other day and already had a good relationship with, Ambassador Eikenberry. And Ambassador Eikenberry says to me, Matt, he's like, nothing here I don't disagree with. I need you to stay here and I need you to work on General McChrystal's team. And I need you to say this to him every day. And he said,
Mm.
if you do that for me, I will help you publish this letter when your time is done here, and I will write the forward for it. This is the American ambassador saying about the letter he
Wow.
wrote. Same thing. My ex-girlfriend, who Bill's still here, Liz. Bill knows Liz. She goes into a meeting with Ambassador Holbrooke at the State Department. Ambassador Holbrooke at that point was the senior representative for Afghanistan, Pakistan. So the
Mhm.
President Obama's guy for Afghanistan, Pakistan. And he opens this meeting by saying, "Who the hell is this guy? I need to talk to him." And then I do. When I get home, I have to go up to see him in New York, and he tells me he agrees with 95% of my letter, right? And
Wow.
so I say all that just to give an example of the support I had. So
Yes.
nobody was telling me, "No, you're an idiot. This is wrong." People are encouraging me. People are congratulating me for doing this. People are telling me, "Yeah, I
Mm.
wish I could do it, but A, B, and C."
Yes.
I mean, and so I didn't feel alone at all. And I was offered a
Wow.
position. I mean, I kept getting offered jobs, either with Eikenberry or with Holbrooke. And then I realized that nothing was going to change. Also, too, again, I was morally and intellectually broken. I was suicidal before the Afghan war because of my moral
Mm.
injury. So, right. I mean, so I had that and I just needed to get away. And then through a Forrest Gump-like moment, I met an editor from the Washington Post, and that's how I ended up on the front page of the Washington Post. And yeah, here I am all these years later. Now, there's been many times, Bob, I've tried to get away from this. I've sold cars. I worked as a consultant. I worked at the YMCA. I've tried to do different things. I always end up back in foreign policy analysis and commentary, doing think tank type work or more activist type work, because I have to remind myself, this is what I loved when I was a kid.
Yes.
And so you asked before about gratitude, and I would say another thing I'm really grateful for is it's not been easy. There's been a lot of challenges. We didn't really talk about traumatic brain injury and PTSD and everything, but I've had I've lost a lot of paychecks because of my traumatic brain injury. So all told, things aren't where I imagined they might have been at 53 years of age. But also, too, I have to realize that like that 18-year-old kid who wanted to go to college and study international relations and was, who just the greatest thing was to get a copy of the New York Times. If he was to see what his life turned out to be, being at think tanks, doing conversations like this. My job is essentially to read the news and talk about it. My God, the gratitude. So I am very, very lucky. But I think there's a lot of things why I've been fortunate to be able to do this is a lot of the things I learned in the Marine Corps about leadership, about responsibility, about being dependable, about being reliable, right? About blossoming where you're planted. And I think that's why I'm able to be in a position where this is what I'm able to do. I'm able to talk to people like you.
That's really incredible. What would you say to that 17, 18-year-old boy, knowing what you know now?
Take it. It's nothing's going to be the end of the world. Nothing's good. There are the things that are serious, of course, right. Of course, you're going to lose loved ones and things like that. But in your personal life, nothing is going to be the end of the world unless there's a major mishap, unless you start doing hard drugs or something like that. You're going to be okay. And take it one day at a time, and always weigh your options. Walk in balance. Walk in balance. Don't and so. But remain, that thing about honor that I said before about how you conduct yourself after something happens. Are you able then, when you are in a place where you can reasonably be expected to make a rational decision, not in the heat of the moment, right? Are you going to be able to live with the decision you made when the dust has settled and you could make a reasonable, rational, right decision about something? What did you choose to do? And so
that's powerful.
Yeah. I mean, I've been fortunate because I do lecture and I do get to speak to college students, and I do speak to young men and women who are getting commissioned in the military. And, the things I always say to them is read. Don't stop reading, and stay away from the books that are blurbed by the generals and the politicians. Read the books that are critical. Read the books that no one else is going to read, but like the books you just showed, particularly about how they got all that stuff out of Iraq. Read all that. Read it. Don't ever stop reading. And then the other thing too, I'd say the two other things for a young officer are have humility and show grace. I would say those are the two things that I struggled with. I came to later in life than I probably should have. But humility and the ability to show grace.
That is really powerful. So we're going to be landing this plan in the next 5 minutes.
Okay.
But I want to refer back to something Captain U.S. Navy Captain says when he asked, do you think it is easier or more effective to effect change from within an organization or from the outside? I think says that when you speak truth to power, right, you did have the opportunity to stay inside the system and influence from within. Why was it so important for you to step outside and speak publicly?
Well, the speaking publicly was accidental in many ways. I wasn't planning on doing it. I certainly was not planning on doing it when I wrote the letter, and when I got a call from our director of Afghan operations, who I knew when I was still in Zabul, after he had read my letter, his first concern was, are you going to go public? And that was the first time I actually thought about saying anything public. But then I was intellectually broken. I just wanted to be part of it. I just saw the whole thing as corrupt and rotten and not worth my time anymore. And for my own sake, my own life, my own soul, I needed to move on. And then I realized that would be the quitting.
Yes.
Right. So if I didn't, right, that would be the quitting. And then going to Mike Weston's funeral. And okay, and my story hadn't come out in the Washington Post yet or anything like that. But the idea of like, am I just going to sit here quietly and listen to people tell lies about why my friend died?
Wow.
You know, and then so and when that came up with my thought originally was I was going to post my resignation letter on Facebook. That's what I was going to do after, right? I mean, and then this Washington Post thing, you know, it just it's a whole story with that.
Yeah,
you know? Like, it really was Forrest Gump like. You know, I mean, but yeah, again, it comes down to your proximity to me and how best can you go about making change. Writing for me at that point, after having been involved with the Iraq War, both in Iraq and in DC, seeing at pretty high levels for a junior person, understanding the institution, the bureaucracy, and understanding too that's the politics that matter. And I'm not going to be able to influence that unless I speak publicly, unless I'm on the outside of it, right? And these are all things I came to in the fall of 2009 after I resigned. But certainly, what I will say about for those of you who are struggling with this is make sure your own house is in order, right? So just as important as being able to influence or make change above you, have you set the conditions within your organization, right? Within your unit, within your office to allow for change to happen, right? So again, you're on a stairwell, right? You can go up and down. And are your subordinates able to affect change in your organization? And that's just as important, you know, because we do have to get to this point in our lives where we do accept, we'd have to practice radical acceptance, right? And we do have to say, I can't change everything. I don't have control over everything, but what I do have control over, am I creating the conditions to allow people to challenge what I'm doing, right? Just as I want to be able to challenge what my boss and their boss are doing, right? So I think that's a way to get yourself, if you're in a tough fix, because I think we all know, we've all been in places where the conditions are terrible, the work conditions are terrible, your boss is terrible, et cetera, and you have to find a way to accept it. And that's horrible, but at least what are you doing that you have control over that makes it so that what you're trying to replicate is actually what exists within what you control.
That's really powerful. Okay, we do need to end the show. So the last question I'm going to ask you about this segment, really in line with what you just said. I'm thinking about the junior naval officer who are listening right now, future leaders in the Navy. At some point, they're going to be waging our wars. But how do you know when it is time to stay and fight from within versus when it's time to step away on principle?
It's going to be your own decision, but you do have to talk to other people. You do have to communicate with other people. You do have to hear other inputs. But it's also too, it's have you given it all a chance? For me, it was this idea that I went to Afghanistan. It was no different than Iraq, right?
Yes.
For me, it was across all lines. I saw just the same things over again, including understanding that the Obama administration had no interest in settling the Afghan war. They had interest in victory in the Afghan war for political purposes, right? That's why the escalation occurs. And then the timeline to get out 18 months later, no rational person thought that was going to work, you know, except for the generals who were pushing this idea because they thought this was their way to become the greatest general of their generation. And let's remember that General Petraeus, you had members of Congress around that time, 2010, 2011, saying General Petraeus should get a 5th star, right? So, I mean, that was all there. That was all there. But for you personally, yeah, have you done all you could? Again, is it prepare like you're going to your court martial? Write it down. Argue it out to yourself. Take time to decide what you're going to do. But it's really going to be that question then of like, when I'm removed from here, a year, 5 years, 10 years from now, I look back on this. Is this something I'm going to shut the door on in my head right away? Or am I going to think about it? And maybe I'm going to wrestle with it. Maybe it's always going to bother me. But like, am I able to say that I did the right thing when it's all said and done. So, certainly to come to that point, I would keep those three things, prepare like it's a court martial, work your ass off, blossom where you're planted, even though it sucks, do your best all the time, because it's just not about you. It's about the men and women that you are serving by being their leader, right? It's about them. And that's where your focus needs to be. Then let that be. And then the other is make sure it's not a small cross.
Yes. Well, we are going to end it there, Matt. But as a Navy commander, I must say, I've had to make some difficult decision. But I will be honest, right? Most leaders will never face a moment like that, like you did. And I think that what you are showing us is that leadership is not just about mission success, but it's also about being able to look at yourself in the mirror when the mission and your values do not align.
Right.
So, if you had to define it in one sentence, what is moral courage when everything is on the line?
It's simply doing what your conscience demands of you in spite of everything else.
Wow.
In spite of the group pressure, the group think, the institution, et cetera. It's doing what your conscience demands of you.
That's incredible. All right. I do like to end the show on a positive note. We did talk about some pretty heavy stuff today. What is one thing you are feeling optimistic about in 2026? So,
oh gosh, I'm not feeling optimistic about the New York Mets. That's for sure. I just there's so much that our younger generations are going into. And I think just because I was, we had this big birthday party for my dad, his 90th birthday celebration, younger folks, my family there and everything. Just the possibilities for them in their lives of what they choose to do. Now, there's all types of stuff hanging over them, in terms of geopolitics and economics and the environment and technology and all those things that God certainly the future looks dystopian. But the promise of what they can do with their lives, if we enable them, if we provide for them, if we give them what they need to be successful. Unfortunately, my family is able to do that with the children in our family. And so I'm grateful for that, for those kids in my family being, in spite of everything, having really good futures possibly. And I would say actually the younger generations, the idea being is like, don't wait for it, take it. Don't wait your turn. Take it, take the future. Don't wait for us to hand it over to you, because my generation, Gen X, is going to hold on to it for as long as the boomers are holding on to it. Right. What I mean? So don't wait for us to give it to you. Just take it from us.
I must say I'm really impressed with Gen Z. Both of my daughter, they've been some of my mentors in many ways too. It's just wonderful to see the way they look at the world, and it's very, very inspiring. Well, thank you so much, Matt. I guess the very last question I'm going to ask, actually, before I ask that one, is there another question I should have asked you that I didn't get a chance to ask? Anything else you wanted to share today, sir? And by the way, this is the longest podcast in the history of the Leadership and Success podcast.
Anyone who knows me anyone who knew it was going to go long. I am not succinct and concise, pithy, or words that have never been associated with
it. Needed to be said. I think
the one thing when I was thinking about this, and I appreciate it because you and I had a dialogue before this, and it's so fantastic. This is not what I usually talk about, and I'm really grateful for this. But the idea, thinking about my own leadership development. And there are born leaders, but leadership is teachable. It's learnable. One of the things that we used to have to read these books on leadership were written by like these, I don't even know if they were from World War II, but maybe before World War II, whatever. And they probably seem cheesy and dated and everything, but they're true. And one thing that stuck with me was this idea of always call people by their name. And I remember being a second lieutenant and reading this book on leadership by someone from, whatever, and being like, okay. And I started doing that. I started, Marines have name tapes, call them by their name. And the difference was undeniable. undeniable.
Yes.
Calling them by their name, by hey Johnson, hey
Yes.
McDaniels, hey Smith, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That type of connection, then, and I learned that from reading a book.
Yes.
I
Yes.
mean, so leadership is teachable, it's learnable. Some people are born with it, but if people want to become leaders, it's something that they can develop.
That is so powerful. Again, that's part of the reason why we have this show, Leadership and Success Podcast, hopefully helping develop the next generation of leaders in the military and in high tech, but really in any industry. But those are the tribe I care the most about. All right, the very last question, and this is the end of the show. Give me one word that would describe or crystallize our shared time together on this show today. Which word comes to mind?
Gratitude.
Yeah.
It does. I'm very grateful for what you're doing, Bob.
Thank you.
I work remotely. I'm part of an organization, but like I do my own thing. I work from home, and you mentioned earlier about the camaraderie, the fraternity, and you don't have to be in the military to find that, but to have this understanding of a shared purpose, and particularly if that purpose is to develop others.
Yes.
I had a first sergeant in the Marine Corps who taught me that very early on. So many of us come in the Marine Corps, or you have some of your early experience in the Marine Corps are very heavy, pessimistic,
Yes.
leadership by shouting, right? Particularly like the recruit training boot camp experience, everything
Yeah.
else. But also too on the officer side, you have that as well, where you just have and I remember first Sergeant Fontenelle saying to me, "My job is to build people up."
Yes.
And that always stuck with me. And that's the purpose. The main thing, if I didn't say anything else, I said about 12,000 words to you, Bob. If there's one thing I guess I'll leave it on for people who are not familiar with the military, is the military is first and foremost and always will be, regardless of AI and drones and everything else, it's first, foremost, and always will be a people person business, right? It will
So true.
always be a people business. That's it. Yeah.
That is so true. The other thing I will add to that, I think some of the best leaders I've had are women. The way you described leadership earlier, that's what I saw 21 years ago when I went to boot camp and in the beginning of my career. But the last 10 years, I think it was more about people, and you didn't have to shout to show that you were in charge.
Right.
People knew you could be calm, and you could speak, lead, and care, and use emotional intelligence and all of that, and really get things done. And I've learned so much from so many great officers throughout my career. So once again, Matt, thanks so much. Really, for me, I am so grateful you took the time to speak to us. Again, this is in the history book. This is the longest show in the history of the show. It's been 5 years I've been doing this, but thank you so much for your leadership, your example, and really appreciate you being one of our master's teachers today. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you, Bob.
All right, everybody. So this is one for the annual. I think I will have 2 more interviews tomorrow, and I will let you know shortly after the show is over who I'm going to be interviewing tomorrow. And really quickly, I want to make sure everybody gets a copy of Bob Woodward's book, Obama's War, but also the other book we mentioned, Deadly Betrayal by Dennis Fritz. I think these books are going to make you think. We also like to celebrate Black History Year, not just Black History Month. So two quick things. In California, I was shocked to find out, I wrote a post about this, but in 1943, in California, if you can believe this. I'm not talking about Alabama or Mississippi, but California, progressive California. On May 5th, 1943, California required marriage licenses to identify the race of each person applying to be married. This was not an administrative paperwork, but it was racial control. They didn't want Black people to marry white or white people to marry Asian or whatever, which is very, very, very strange. And this is 1943. It's only like 80 years ago. It's not like 200 or 300 years ago. And that was in California. Anyway, and the other thing I wanted to mention for celebrating our Black history is about the very first African American who actually won a Supreme Court case for the NAACP. His name was Charles Hamilton Houston. All right. That's all I have for today. I hope to see you tomorrow for the 2 leadership conversation we are going to have. And thanks again for watching, and have a wonderful rest of your day. This show should be available on all of the podcast platform by the end of today. Thanks again. and immediately available for replay on LinkedIn and YouTube. Bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to the Leadership and Success Podcast with your host, Coach BZ. If today's episode added value to your leadership journey, be sure to subscribe, share, and join us again for more wisdom nuggets on how to lead better and achieve greater success. Remember, leadership is the most critical skill of our time. The world will always need leaders to inspire others, drive innovation, and execute meaningful strategy. So why not count yourself among the bold leaders shaping the 21st century? Until next time, stay inspired, stay committed, and keep leading with excellence.